Tōna Ngāmahira.
I stand to raise a couple of points, and understanding the comments made by my colleagues, want to highlight to the House that Te Ture Whenua Māori, a significant piece of land legislation, is also in the process of draft iterations yet to be tabled in the House. And it's really for that very matter that I think it's important to draw the attention of the House to the potential interlocking impact of the Land Transfer Bill on Te Ture Whenua Māori in ways that may have unintended consequences, or just because the timing and the sequencing have not been lined up as well as it could. In fact, my colleague Meka Whaitiri would be the very person to stand in this House and comment on this bill, but here are a few things that I've captured from her concerns around Te Ture Whenua Māori, which I would like to draw the attention of the House to. Firstly, there is no other bit of legislation in relation to land transfer that is more important to Māori than the Ture Whenua Māori Act. The consultations that have taken place have been extensive, yes they have. However, they have continued to raise concerns amongst Māori landowners, actually small family landowners, about the extent to which that bill assures protection of their interests in land. So when we're talking about land transfer in a very practical sense for a number of Māori landowners, one of the practical problems that they have is unlocking landlocked land. And if, for example, paper roads, Māori roads, unformed legal roads aren't registered on their land, people have to go through a whole rigmarole to go to LINZ to be able to investigate whether or not that is the case. And if it's not recorded on the title, then they have to go through the Māori Land Court. One simple problem that relates to the Land Transfer Act that I think, in terms of good conscience and due diligence of the committee, to consider fully the impact of going towards a new act, and I understand all the reasons why you might want to do that. This type of issue needs to be looked at. I raised earlier the issue of interlocking legislation. Take, for example, the provisions of the Rating Valuation Act 1998. Part 15B specifically relates to Māori land and the Land Transfer Act 1952. I think that the committee should consider the extent to which the Rating Valuation Act, as it refers to Māori land, is or is not accommodating and taking forward the specific provisions of that Act with this piece of legislation. Take also a practical situation where a number of reserve lands that are administered by local government, that were gifted by Māori for a very long time ago, and whether or not those protections and those registrations on title will carry forward. And I raise that again to implore the conscience of the Select Committee to have a look at these types of issues, to give the assurance that if it is housekeeping legislation, if it is a tidy up, then nothing is lost, and that there are no unintended consequences in terms of taking these matters forward, but also providing the types of protections over Māori land and the registrations on the title that should be there. Another area of interest, there are ngā whenua rāhui kawinata that are deemed to be an interest in land, but not necessarily recorded on the title of those particular lands. Now, it seems to me that, and again, if you take a surface read of this bill, that type of history of land gifted for a specific purpose with a specific intent the history of that could be lost if it's not recorded on the title in the way that the bill requires that it should be. I've commented, and I'm sure my colleague Meka Whaitiri would want me to make the very important point around lands that have been taken under the Public Works Act. This is not a new issue for Parliament. There have been all types of arguments that have been brought to the attention of members of this House around the significant challenges of addressing this fully. And it's not just a matter for this Land Transfer Bill, it relates to other bits of legislation, Local Government Act, Ture Whenua Māori, Reservations Act and the like. But I did want to make mention, Mr. Speaker, of the Public Works Act and the potential impact of losing the historical nature of how land was acquired under this piece of legislation. Now, if I've got that wrong, I'm happy to have gotten that point wrong, but I think it does require at least a question in the Select Committee to pursue that, because it would be in the interests of members across the House, because this isn't just a Māori issue, to actually satisfy themselves, again, that there are no unintended consequences of rewriting this legislation. In fact, the provisions which relate to, and again I'm summarising, the provisions which relate to land over 100 years ago, which in short seems to me that there is a potential that land with a 100-year history perhaps may not have the full registration of interests on its title. And if that is the case, it does cover the very issues that go to the heart of treaty settlements. I think in some practical way, as Labor has put a date on settling historical claims at 2020, if it was the case that all historical claims were settled at a point in time, one might consider that these types of issues would not be a matter because they would all be resolved under the treaty settlement process. But again, due diligence of the committee, I think, should just pursue with a little bit of effort whether or not this is a problematic issue that's been created, albeit an unintended consequence. Mr. Speaker, members on our side of the House have raised a number of issues around land transfer, having surety of ownership and purchasing land, but I really want to focus the substance of my contribution to how Māori interests in land are being dealt with under the Ture Whenua Māori. There remains outstanding issues that are of utmost concern. Really worried about the nature of the legislation being proposed in the Ture Whenua Māori coming to the House. Really want to register that act and this act to a degree go hand in hand, as the point was made by my colleague Marama Davidson. Implore the committee to just pull through some of the key concerns and ask the question, pursue the matters that are going to give greatest assurance that in tidying up 3 acts in this land transfer bill, you're not creating unintended consequences which create greater grievances in the House and less surety for people who want to purchase land. Kia ora.